Thank you for that story. I don't care how old you get, listening to the ocean in the shell is still something you have to do whenever you see a conch shell. I just think it's contractually required of all of us as human beings. All right. I have a couple things to say real quick before we dive into the last of our Sabbath talks. Number one, this is our last potluck in the park of this year. I know you guys can read this on the camera, right? All right. That's it. This afternoon, 1 o'clock. You can't read it? Look, there's a seat in the front row right here, okay? You probably still can't read it from there. All right, we're going back. Same place as always. Again, if you need directions, let me know, and I'll give you the wrong ones like I did last time. Keeps you on your toes. You'll certainly get to know Peoria a lot better. But anyways, again, guys, we say this every single time. Even if you forgot to bring something or just didn't bring it, you're still welcome there. You're still wanted there. Come on out and join us, okay? 1 o'clock at the park. And again, I'll give you directions, or maybe somebody more qualified will give you directions. So that's going on this afternoon. It's the last one of the year. So it's kind of sad because we've had 4 of them. And when you have the last one, it just means winter is coming. And that's just not a good thing. All right? It's still too hot to even think about that. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing I want to mention is that we have something really, really special coming up in a few weeks. I think, I'm trying to do this off the top of my head, Iris and Hermanio, but we have a baptism coming up. By the way, this mug is brought to you by the pastor of the Hinsdale Church, who dropped this off when he was in Peoria, and I'll hold it up so you guys can see it on camera. It's in Hebrew, of course. And it says something in Hebrew. In Hebrew. I know, right? So when people ask me what it says, I say it says something in Hebrew. And you're like, well, I can see that. It's like, no, it says something in Hebrew. It's a little who's on first thing, so I appreciate that. Anyways, we're going to have a baptism. I want to say the 18th of October, that week. And we're excited about that. This is somebody who's been watching online and joining us. I went out to D.C. to do some research of the archives for the podcast, and I got to meet this family, and they are awesome. They're watching right now. They're watching every week, and we're so happy that they're gonna fly out, and we get to baptize Hermanio. So I'm excited about that. Are you guys excited about that? That's awesome. Now, here's the appeal. If any of you want to join them, water's going to be in the tank. We'll just push you in too. All right? There's room for you. All right, don't waste the water, guys. Don't waste the water by only letting one person use it. So if you're thinking about baptism, want to go down that road, we got time. We can get you in there. All right. So we're looking forward to that. That's going to be the 18th of October, I believe. If I get that wrong, forgive me, but that's what I remember. I'm not going to pull out my phone right now and check it. So these are some exciting things that are happening, and it just makes my heart glad. It makes my heart glad. Okay. Well, we have been talking about the Sabbath. We have been talking about it and talking about it and talking about it and talking about it. Here it is, part 12. No more jokes about this being part 700. It's part 12, a good round biblical number. This one's called the end of the Sabbath. The end of the Sabbath, okay? Over the last 11 messages, we have seen how the Sabbath was founded at creation as a promise of God's presence with us. He created everything. He created human beings, and as soon as he's done creating human beings, he stops, he pauses, he rests so that he can enjoy that time with human beings and so that we can enjoy that time with him, so we can get to know him. He's not just some distant God who's, just trying to paint a painting and then he puts it in the closet and he's done and goes and does something else somewhere else in the universe. He wants to spend time with us. So that's the Sabbath at creation. He kind of gets off our radar for a little bit in terms of the story that the Bible is telling. It pops back up at Sinai, and it pops back up at Deuteronomy, and it takes on 2 additional meanings. In Exodus, it takes on the meaning of it's a memorial of creation. We keep the Sabbath to remember our Creator. In Deuteronomy 5, it pops up as a memorial of redemption. because God is the one who brought the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt. He saved them, and so they keep Sabbath to remember God as creator and God as redeemer. And those are the two messages of the Sabbath there. It kind of disappears again. It pops up through the prophets, and especially it comes back in the prominence in the life of Jesus, who modeled his ministry as the living embodiment of the Sabbath year, of the Jubilee. That's how Jesus, when he got up in the synagogue on the day that he announced his ministry, he quoted from a Sabbath text in the Old Testament in order to announce his ministry has now begun. He saw himself as the embodiment of the Sabbath. It doesn't mean the Sabbath went away. It's just that's how important it was that Jesus himself was embodying it. And that's why he could offer people rest, because he is taking on the role of the Sabbath in the flesh. All right? And we've seen that while Paul kind of mentions the Sabbath one time in all of his writings, which is kind of a little strange because he wrote a good third of the New Testament. You expect maybe it would pop up again. But again, these are letters written to specific churches for specific problems, none of which seem to really involve the Sabbath. Nevertheless, the Sabbath is, the message of the Sabbath and the message of Paul to the churches are very, very much in harmony. In Galatians and in Colossians, he's reminding people that the grace of God is for all people, just as the Sabbath, Jesus reminds us, was created for all humans and not humans for the Sabbath. We weren't made to serve the Sabbath. The Sabbath was made to bless us. And Paul tells the Colossians that we need to remember Jesus as our creator and our redeemer, which is the two messages of the Sabbath in Exodus and Deuteronomy as well. Okay, so Paul is running parallel with the Sabbath. He's not against it. He doesn't have to mention it by name. His message is the message of the Sabbath in those senses. Okay? Now, today we're going to dive in and we're going to talk about what happened to the Sabbath. Because, as you are probably very well aware of, most Christians do not keep the Sabbath. And, it's a really strange tale. We're going to take our time going through that. It's going to be really interesting. But I want to get something clear before we begin. I want to say a word about Sunday before we continue on. I mean, this is a complicated subject. I would say most Christians that I've met do not consider Sunday to be the Sabbath. Which is why they go to church on Sunday, and then they go watch football games, and then they go out to eat, and they do whatever it is that they want to do on Sunday. Many Sunday preachers and theologians complain about this. They would like people to honor Sunday a little bit more than they do by resting and not doing all these sort of things. So there's that tension even among Christians who go to church on Sunday and observe that. If you ask them why they go on Sunday, most of them will tell you it's in honor of the resurrection. But, if we're honest with ourselves as human beings, they go because that's just when most people go. It's when their mom and dad went. It's when their friends are going. It's just it's the time that people have gone for hundreds and hundreds of years. It may be in honor of the resurrection, but honestly, we just go because we're creatures of habit. Honestly, we do a lot of things for that reason. And, this is not always the case. People say, well, I don't see Sunday as a replacement for the Sabbath. It's just a day we go to church and all that kind of stuff. But this has not always been the case. In fact, for most of the history of this land, of this country, even before it was known as America, the European Christians who came here saw Sunday as the Sabbath. The Puritans did. They passed laws against working on Sunday. These laws have continued through the 1700s. They continued into the 1800s. Towards the end of the 1800s, these laws started to wane a little bit as the Industrial Revolution and other factors were combining to kind of secularize America. They made a renewed effort to legislate Sunday all over again. There was the Blair Bill in 1888. There were other bills that followed even into the 1900s, even into the 1960s. There are laws protecting Sunday. It's not always as explicit as let's make Sunday God's day it's never quite that. Sometimes it's seen in preventing stores from opening on Sunday. Right? They don't say, well, this is a religious law. They'll just say, we don't think stores should be open on Sunday. And there were many of these laws trying to avoid becoming unconstitutional. Many of these laws, the purpose of them was, if we just close down everything but church is the only option people will have, right? It's kind of a way of getting at it from the back end. So they passed these laws, and Seventh-day Adventists have been among those who have been threatened and arrested and jailed in violation of these laws for either working on Sunday or appearing to work on Sunday. It doesn't really matter sometimes. So I don't think that most Christians keep Sunday as if they keep the Sabbath today. However, they have inherited a day with a deep legacy as the new Christian Sabbath and all of the laws that were passed to protect it along the way. So even if somebody today says, I don't keep Sunday as the Sabbath, that may be true as far as their personal intention is concerned, but the legacy of Sunday as an alternative Sabbath is there. It's there. And there's still laws on the books that will testify to that. Okay? Now, let me move forward. Many of these Christians will say that the change away from the Sabbath towards Sunday occurred in the New Testament. Okay? And we do see that a change did occur. In fact, if you are reading through some of this Nicene-era Christian writings in the 4th century, in the 300s, you'll find the Apostolic Constitutions, which is not as, it's a fun title, page turner there. And it goes through and it says all these great things about the Sabbath. God rested on it. God put these commandments. But then it says, it just suddenly turns and says, all of which the Lord's Day surpasses. Now, what day do they mean by the Lord's Day in the 4th century? I mean Sunday. And then it says, the Lord's Day was commanded by you, Master, to offer thanks for all these things. That just leaves me with the question, when? When was the Lord's Day commanded by God? And I think the story that we're about to tell from history and from the Bible, we could title it The Great Forgetting. Because I believe these Christians in the 4th century honestly believed that God had at some point commanded Sunday to be kept in place of the Sabbath, even if they didn't really put their finger as to when that happened. Like, they actually came to believe that. And this great forgetting happened very quickly, uncomfortably quickly in terms of history. All right, because you're not going to find evidence for this in the New Testament. The New Testament never uses the word Sunday. It uses the word first day. This is how Jews reckoned the days of the week: first day, second day, third day, fourth day, fifth day, sixth day, Sabbath. And they reckoned time because the Sabbath was the centerpiece of the week. So why is the day that we call Sunday the first day? Because it was the first day after the Sabbath. That's kind of the long, correct title of the day. It was the first day after the Sabbath, and then the second day after the Sabbath, and the third day after. The Sabbath was the center of the Hebrew week. All other days were named based on their relationship to the Sabbath. What was another name for Friday? The preparation day. Preparation for what? Preparation for the Sabbath. It was the day you got your laundry done and your cooking done and all that kind of stuff, your errands done, because you didn't do those things on Sabbath, so it was called the preparation day. So all these days of the weeks in the Hebrew conception of in their calendar were named so because of their relationship to the Sabbath. So it doesn't use the word Sunday because this was the day on which the worship of the sun took place, and no good Jew was going to honor the sun god by calling it Sunday. It just wasn't going to happen. You will find early Christians saying that, but they'll usually kind of qualify it by saying the day on which people worship the sun or something like that. But they'll never just kind of use Sunday casually. They'll always say it's the first day or the day on which people worship the sun or something to that effect. All right, so the New Testament doesn't say Sunday, it says first day. And most of the time, which you'll find the two words, first day, in the New Testament, they're in reference to the day on which Jesus rose. Right? Now, early on the first day, the women went to the tomb. Those kind of texts. Those are most of the references you'll find. You're going to find two other passages, though, that are different. First of all, you have Acts chapter 20, and this is a story where the believers gathered together to break bread, and they listened to Paul speak, and Paul spoke all the way until midnight. Somebody fell asleep, fell out the window, and there had to be a miracle to bring this person back, okay? Raise your hand if you ever understand what it's like to fall asleep during a sermon because he preaches too long. All right, we got a couple. Very good. All right, thank you. Some of you are elders. We're going to have a conversation about that later. This is what happened. Now, it says that this happened on the first day of the week in Acts chapter 20, okay? Which means, how did the Jews conceive of time? When did the day begin? Was it at 12:01 a.m.? Do you guys know, when did the day begin for the Jews? In the evening, Right? It's sundown to sundown, because this is the rhythm we find in creation. The evening in the morning, not the morning in the evening. The evening in the morning were the first day. The evening in the morning were the second day. That's how creation goes. That's how they reckon their days. It wasn't until later that this idea of clock time has prevailed, right? This idea of, they had hours. They didn't have clocks per se, but they had hours. They had ways of telling the hours of the day. And it wasn't until the Romans, and then later on especially, where this idea of we've got midnight to midnight thing started from. But for the Jews, it's evening to evening. So Saturday night was technically the beginning of the first day. Okay, but this is when they're meeting. It says in the evening on the first day, they don't mean Sunday night, they mean Saturday night. And this is how Justo Gonzalez, a church historian, he's a Methodist, this is how he puts it. Said it would seem that these early Jewish Christians, after attending Sabbath worship in the synagogue when they were still allowed to do so, would gather in the evening of the same day, which to them would be the next day, in order to break bread. So what he's saying here is, these Christians, they would go to synagogue with their fellow Jews, right? This is how it happened in the beginning. We see Jesus going to synagogue, Paul going to synagogue. This is where they would meet. But because they believed a little bit differently from their compatriots in the synagogue, they would also meet as believers in Jesus and as Jesus as the Messiah. They'd meet after the Sabbath would be ended. Why? Because if they're going to meet together for a meal, they're not going to cook that on the Sabbath. You didn't do that back then. You didn't make these meals because you're going to have to gather wood and, put a huge pot on it. It was a huge ordeal. So they would have this meal after the sun went down so they wouldn't break the Sabbath. Which implies, of course, that they were still keeping the Sabbath. And it implies that they were beginning to meet, yes, even on the evening, Saturday night, which they would also consider Sunday. It's the beginning of the first day, okay? So we have this, but that's all that it says. Okay, they met together, they ate, they listened to Paul preach on this one occasion. Does that mean it was a habitual thing that Paul or somebody else routinely preached on Saturday night until midnight? Probably not. We understand that Paul is about to leave somewhere, so it's like a goodbye thing. Justo Gonzalez is probably right that the believers habitually probably met after synagogue in the evening of Saturday. That's probably something that was happening. But, was there always a sermon? I don't know. Maybe they just met for dinner and the talk and the fellowship with one another. You can't, how much are you going to read into one text? How normative is this experience? We've just got this one verse. Okay, well, you can go on. There's one more section in 1 Corinthians 16 where Paul tells the believers to set aside set aside money for those who are in need and to set it aside on the first day. Well, some people say that's them collecting offering as part of a church service. Like, really? I don't know. I just see him saying, put some money aside on the first day and somebody will be by to pick it up and deliver it to those who are most in need of it. I guess if you see an observance of Sunday there, you're seeing more than I'm seeing, because even early Adventists, some of you guys may not know this, who were obeying the literal command of Paul here, did not collect, in the first days of our church, did not collect money during the Sabbath worship service. They collected it on Sunday because they thought, well, Paul says collect money on Sunday. He doesn't say collect it on Saturday. So collect money for those who need it on Sunday and somebody will be by. How would you like to do that? The pastor or the elder or the treasurer show up on Sunday to all of your houses and say, it's tithe time. What you got? I bet giving was up. And if you're in trouble or not based on who gets sent to your door. If I come, you're fine. But if Steve comes, or if Dave Storley comes, our treasurer, you're in serious trouble because he's both head elder and treasurer. So that's like the double guns who are coming at you, all right? But that's how they used to do it. Early Adventists even obeyed this. Doesn't mean they kept Sunday. Doesn't mean they did anything different. It just means they collected the offering and tithes and stuff on Sunday. Okay, but these are your two texts in the New Testament that we're building this great big tradition on, and it's not exactly clear why. I don't think the weight of these texts, is enough to support this foundation, the weight of the structure of Sunday that people are placing on it. That's it. Nowhere is Sunday commanded, and it would be ridiculous to me to infer from these two texts that God had contemplated some kind of change, or that Sunday was now the primary day of worship. There's two ways of looking at it that Christians do it. Either Sunday replaced the Sabbath, or the Sabbath just died quietly in its sleep, and Sunday's it's not the Sabbath, it's just a day for worship. Neither one of those assertions can be supported by these two texts. But that's all you've got. That's all you've got. And yet, we have to account for the fact that something happened for us to get to Sunday. And it happened very early. This is what's kind of disturbing, because around 100 AD, Ignatius of Antioch wrote a letter to the Magnesians, and he included this one throwaway line, and it's under a little bit of dispute in terms of whether, what exactly he meant by this. But I'll just throw it up for you, and you can see for yourself. All right, it says, "Those then who lived by ancient practices," meaning in the Old Testament, "arrived at a new hope. They ceased to keep the Sabbath and lived by the Lord's day, on which our life as well as theirs shone forth, thanks to him and his death." Now, if he's talking about the Old Testament prophets, some people have questioned, did he really mean what it sounds like he means? Because to assert that Isaiah or Ezekiel gave up the Sabbath and started keeping Sunday is the most ridiculous thing you could possibly say. Like, it just strains credulity that a good Jewish prophet in the Old Testament would stop keeping the Sabbath and live by the Lord's day. So there's some question over, because we have a number of copies of this. Many of them date to about 1000 AD. We don't have anything even close to when this letter was written. We know it was a very, very early letter, but we don't know exactly the precise wording here. But we do know that, this is around 100 AD. We know that there are plenty of other writers in the 2nd century who would say something very similar to this. So even if Ignatius of Antioch didn't mean this precisely as it reads, or maybe he worded it a little bit differently than we have today, there were plenty of others who were saying the same thing. But that's around the 100 AD. Do you guys know when John died, roughly, or when he wrote Revelation? It was in the 90s AD. And here we have somebody, a Christian, talking about the end of Sabbath and the beginning of Sunday, like within years. And now, again, the range of when the letter to the Magnesians was written could be between 90 and 117 or so. It's somewhere within that range that was written. I just picked the middle point and said 100 AD. It's possible that letter could have been written while John was still alive. We also have the Didache, which is written in the late 1st century, definitely during John's life, pretty definitely during John's life, which also talks about Sunday as the Lord's day. And so if Acts, in which we see the believers going to synagogue on Sabbath and then meeting together after synagogue, if that was written about 80 AD, let's say 70 or 80 AD, somewhere in that range, if Acts was written then and the letter to the Magnesians was written in 100 AD, then that means we have like 20 or 30 years in which this change, a radical change, happened between Saturday and Sunday. Isn't that disturbing? It's disturbing to me. But we can be generous. Maybe Acts was written a little bit earlier. Maybe the letter to the Magnesians and the Didache was written later. Let's give them 75 years. That's still not a lot of time for a radical shift away from the Sabbath, which had been kept for thousands of years, to just give way to Sunday, given that we don't really have any evidence for it in the New Testament. Are you recognizing this problem? There may be no basis for it in the New Testament, but it happened very quickly, historically, just very quickly, almost right out the gate. Possibly even it was beginning to happen when the apostles, some of them were still alive in places. So this brings me to a note by Sigve Tonstad. He says, in light of the Sabbath message that is thus centered on the faithfulness of God, we should not expect the church to abandon the seventh day, right? Nobody would expect history to turn out this way, just reading through the Bible. But history, he says, springs a surprise on the student in this respect. The religion that receives its name from Jesus Christ does not retain the Sabbath, even though Jesus said that he's the Lord of the Sabbath. Why? Why? Another scholar says, nowhere do we find any evidence which would unambiguously establish where, when, and why the Christian observance of Sunday arose. We don't know why. We don't know where it came from. We don't have any transitional documents of we're debating between the two. or like where is it first? Where is this idea first coming from? We don't have anything like that, not in the first century at least. But we know that early Christians began meeting on Sunday, worshiping on Sunday, and eventually saw Sunday as a replacement for the Sabbath. That eventually did happen in that order, but we're left to guess as to why it happened. There are no great debates. There's no church councils. There's no heretical movements that others are dealing with that concern the Sabbath whatsoever. I mean, you'd expect. I mean, they're arguing about the nature of Christ. They're arguing about communion and what it means and what exactly is happening with communion. They're arguing about so many things, trying to sort them out. I don't mean arguing in a bad way. I mean, but they're discussing these things and debating these things and trying to figure these things out as early Christians. They're trying to figure out their relationship to the state. They're trying to figure out their relationship to military service in the Roman army. They're sorting through all of those things, but nowhere do we see a debate about the Sabbath. It's bizarre. It's bizarre. I'm waiting for like an Unsolved Mysteries program to go through this. All right? I don't know who's the right person to lead that. Of course, if you ask History Channel, it's aliens that did it, but what are you going to do? Aliens changed the Sabbath. We have reasons as to understand maybe what happened, and we can make some educated guesses here. First, there was demographic changes. So long as the church, the early Christian church, was predominantly Jewish, the Sabbath was definitely safe. But as more and more Gentiles, kind of the result of Paul's preaching, certainly not Paul's intention, but the result of Paul's preaching, as they became more and more Gentile in the church, people who didn't grow up with the Sabbath, people who saw it as a Jewish thing, there's a greater risk that the Sabbath would be in trouble. Especially because in the early church, the leadership of the church seemed to be with James in Jerusalem, but Jerusalem gets surrounded by Roman armies. Presumably, the Christians flee ahead of that. They realize what's coming because Jesus had warned them. They flee. The leadership of the church disperses. We have traditions of various apostles going this way and that way and that way, right? Thomas goes to India. We don't know for sure. But it seems that they scattered. So we don't have this leadership in Jerusalem anymore. It kind of leaves it up for everyone to kind of decide their path. There's a leadership vacuum in the church. And it's harder for distinctly Jewish things to hold sway. Okay? The second thing we have is political changes. As I mentioned, the Jews rebelled against Rome in 66 AD and in 132 AD. The Christians were seen by the Romans as just basically like a Jewish offshoot. And so the Christians, when the Jews were in trouble, said, we're not with them. we don't know them, especially as they became more predominantly Gentile, the Christians did. We have nothing to do with them, completely different religion. Don't look down on us, don't persecute us, don't hate us, So there was a reason to distance themselves from the Jews. Again, this is just some speculation, but what better way to distance yourself from the Jews than to keep a different day? Because you don't expect the Romans to have nuance. Well, see, they both go to synagogue or church on Saturday. They claim they're not in league to each other, but they're the only two groups of people in the entire empire that do that, so they're probably the same group. No, we're just going to pick a different day. Not going to expect the Romans to exercise a lot of nuance in how they see different people groups. So there were these political changes in the Roman Empire. Third, no doubt there were some Hellenistic pagan influences in the early church. Many of these pagan converts used to regard Sunday as a special day. Some worshiped the sun god, right? Everyone kind of chose what god they were going to worship, but you respected them all, and the sun god was one of them. So Sunday's already a special day for your neighbors and for your friends and for the rest of your family that didn't convert to Jesus. So, going to church on Sunday too was, we're already comfortable with that. And fourth, anti-Semitism. It wasn't just enough to distance yourself from the Jews. A common feature in early Christian writings is just saying the absolute worst things about Jews. As the church became more and more Gentile, as the Jews got in more and more trouble with the Romans, this became more and more of a feature. John Chrysostom, who preached in the 4th century, who was considered the golden-tongued preacher of his day, he called Jewish meetings, including the synagogue, profane places with unclean doors. I love that one because if you're going to insult a place, why not go for the doors? Never liked those doors anyway. They're unclean. Why not the windows, buddy? Just go for the windows too. And then worst of all, talking about the table, they're eating together, their fellowship together, called it the table of demons. Now, this is a strange thing, considering that Jesus went to synagogue and Paul went to synagogue and all the early disciples met in synagogue, but now it's a place for demons? You see how the story is being changed over time? Like now, it wasn't enough that the early Christians went to synagogue and then met with each other that evening to eat and maybe to worship or whatever. It wasn't enough that they do that. Now it's don't even go anywhere near a synagogue. It's a place for demons. And then he calls them Christ killers, which is a phrase that has been used in all the centuries since to justify killing Jews for no other reason than the fact that they're Jews. All the way down to the Nazis, and this is a problem. So you see, we have this, it's not just we don't want to be seen with them. It's that they're eating at the table of demons. They're the people who killed Jesus. Right? Even though we're talking about people who lived hundreds of years after Jesus died, they're all guilty of that. It's horrible. It's shameful, but that's what happened. And it's hard not to imagine that had no small degree of influence on what day people considered to be holy, a day they considered to be worthy of worship, worshiping God. It'd be surprising if they would talk that way about the Jews and still keep the Sabbath. They're rewriting their own history, aren't they? They're rewriting their own history. It went from where that God's people are among the Jews. Paul talked about what matters is that you have faith and then you're grafted in, you belong, to we want nothing to do with those people anymore. They're of Satan and we're off on our own. And it's like, that's an amazing bit of spiritual gymnastics that you guys have gone through over a couple hundred years. By the 300s, we still have evidence, even in the time of John Chrysostom. He wouldn't say some of these things, and he would go on about the Sabbath and stuff. He wouldn't say these things if there weren't Christians who still kept the Sabbath. And there were. He's trying to get Christians who seem to have keeping Sabbath, he wants them to stop and go completely over the Sunday. And so we see, even in the 300s, there were people they would keep Saturday as a Sabbath, and then they would go to church with their fellow Christians as well. Now, Adventists commonly repeat the claim that early popes changed the Sabbath, or that the Roman Emperor Constantine changed the Sabbath, but that isn't technically true. Because as we've seen, there are documents in the late 1st century that suggest Christians were starting to honor Sunday in some way, shape, or form. They were starting to call it the Lord's Day. That was long before any pope, long before any council, long before any kind of structure emerged along those lines, long before Constantine. Constantine was pushing the ball forward. He was a Roman emperor in the early 300s who passed laws calling all citizens to rest on Sunday. But Constantine couldn't have made that law if there wasn't already a large number of Christians who were keeping Sunday, right? He was both responding to what was already happening and also, pushing it forward. Constantine was not exactly a bold leader trying to get out ahead of everybody. He was a shrewd politician. He saw that most Christians were on Sunday now, or at least many of them. It's hard to say exactly how many. And he knew that many pagans were obviously worshiping their gods on Sunday, and it was just a political move to say, hey, why don't we get you guys all on the same page? I can win some points with my constituents here. But and that's what makes this story so hard to tell, because I don't have answers. Nobody has answers as to why this happened. We just know that it did, because look around, look where we are, look at how Christianity is these days. All right. Now later on, of course, the Roman Catholic Church will claim that they changed it, take credit for it. They see popes going all the way back to Peter. I think that'd be a news to Peter, but, doesn't stop them from claiming credit for it. But we have no decision. We have nothing. We have nothing that suggests it was some kind of top-down decision that was made for the church. It just happens. It just creeps in, and it just happens. Probably for all of the reasons I mentioned, you could probably find 12 other reasons as to why it happened. It just happened. And it is the way that it is now. And it's lamentable because this isn't the direction that the Sabbath had been going in the Bible. This isn't the direction things we're meant to end up. I mean, if you look at the last book of the Bible here, Revelation, we see the spirit of the Sabbath hovering over these dark waters. You go to the first angel's message. This is in Revelation chapter 14, verse 6 and 7. You probably have heard this one before. A little tongue-in-cheek there. It says, "Then I saw another angel flying in midair, and he had the eternal gospel to proclaim to those who live on the earth, to every nation, tribe, language, and people. And he said in a loud voice," just keep in mind there, I always include verse 6 because you notice that he has the eternal gospel. So whatever he's about to say is part of this gospel. He says, "Fear God and give him glory, because the hour of his judgment has come. Worship him who made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and the springs of water." Now, we've showed last week that part of this verse is lifted word for word from the Sabbath commandment. When he says, "Worship him who made the heavens, the earth, the sea," in the exact same order, the exact same words from Exodus 20, verse 11. Right? So there's a hint here. And if you are a Hebrew-minded Christian in the first century, you would not fail to recognize this. It's we who are less familiar with our Bibles and certainly less familiar with the original languages that we don't see the connection. But he's making this connection here between fearing God, give him glory, and worship him who made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and the springs of water. Making a connection between this final message of the gospel and the Sabbath commandment. How do we worship him who made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and the springs of water? In part because we keep the Sabbath. So it's almost like at the very end of the Bible, there's depicted these three angels who have one final message to give to the entire world. And one of those messages, hey, don't forget your Creator. What happens in Christian history? Like, what's the first thing that they do? They forget the Sabbath. This angel is saying here, worship him. Doesn't mean it's the only way to worship him. Right? But he's lifting this language from the Sabbath commandment, a commandment that was designed to help us remember and honor our Creator who made all of this stuff. And John knows this angel knows this. This is why he's using these precise words, because he wants us to remember the Sabbath. It's his way of reminding us. Again, he doesn't have to use the word Sabbath. Anybody who had known the Sabbath commandment would know that this language is from the Sabbath commandment. Just like today I can say to be or not to be, that is the question. I don't have to say Shakespeare. You all know it's from Shakespeare because you're familiar with that thing. It's the only thing you know in Shakespeare. Let's be honest. Don't know what it means, why it was said, in what context it was given. You just know that dumb phrase. It just gets repeated everywhere. All right, I don't have to attribute it to Shakespeare. I don't have to cite a source. You all know where it comes from. So did the early Christians. They all knew where this language in the first angel's message was coming from. They didn't have a footnote. They didn't need one in order to prove where it was coming from. So this eternal gospel that this first angel is spreading through the entire world in the end, it includes language taken word from the Sabbath commandment, a call to remember our Creator. That's what the Sabbath was designed for. And yet, in our history as Christians, it's the first thing we forgot. Deliberately, it seems, forgot. That's why I call this the great forgetting. Because when you read some of the things they wrote, these early Christians wrote, you realize that it's like, this is bizarre, because I was just in the New Testament, and I see Paul going to church, going to worshiping at the synagogue, and I see Jesus doing the same thing, and presumably all the other disciples do too. They talk about it all the time in the Gospels, right? It's a highlight. Jesus went in the synagogue on the Sabbath day, over and over and over. It wasn't just an incidental thing. It's making a point that Jesus was devout, right? He's seeing where the other believers are. He's trying to reason with them. He's trying to preach to them. He's trying to connect with them. And this was a feature in the Gospels, not a bug. And then you read what Christians write in the 2nd century on to the 4th century, and you're like calling the synagogues this, that, and the other, and you just think to yourself, that's not what the gospel sounds like. How did you guys get so far off in this way from what the gospel sounds like, what it reads like, the way that it looked at other people? And it's bizarre to me how far, it was this kind of collective amnesia that happened. They chose to band together and forget for at least some of the reasons that I mentioned, not all of them and more. But here in Revelation, we see there's this call that comes out in the end. It's the eternal gospel, and it says, remember, remember, remember your Creator. Why? Because it seems that we were we were always in danger of forgetting. And that's not all in Revelation, by the way, because a few verses later in Revelation chapter 14, we're told that the wicked have no rest day or night. And we're told that those who are martyrs, those who die for the sake of Jesus, it says here in verse 13, they will rest from their labor, for their deeds will follow them. So you see that rest is a really big deal in Revelation too. Those who are rejecting God find no rest in the end. Those who are embrace God, even though they may die down here, will find rest in Him. And of course, when we see the picture of the new heavens and new earth at the very end of Revelation, what we're seeing is a place where the Sabbath kind of becomes physical, where the rest that God has promised since the creation of the world returns to us, where we don't have to fear being attacked. We don't have to fear crop failure. We don't have to fear disease. We don't have to fear anything. We live in a place where even the animals get along, where the cats like the dogs, and the lions like the lambs, not just to eat them, but to just spend time with them, I guess. I don't know what they're going to do, what they're going to have to talk about. But this is the place, and you realize, this is peace. This is rest. This is what Sabbath, these weekly Sabbath for all of human history has been pointing us to. It's been, this was meant to be a day where all people come together in peace and worship their common Creator, where they spend time in the presence of God. And it's this is in some way like what the Garden of Eden was about, right? It was a place. The Sabbath is a time. The Garden of Eden was a place that kind of embodied that purpose of the Sabbath. This is where God would come down in the cool of the day and spend time with His creation, and where they would not have to worry about tending to the garden for one day, and they would spend time with their Creator. That gets lost in terms of a space in human history, but the time remains. We can still honor God with that time. We can still visit Him in that time. And then when we get back to the end of the Bible, we see the Sabbath as a place is restored to us, where this new heavens and a new earth is the physical manifestation of the spirit of the Sabbath. If the Sabbath could take on if it could take on flesh, we see it in Jesus. If it could take on structure like trees and grass and life in that way, it would be this new heavens and a new earth. And so we see this common theme even in Revelation. If it doesn't use the word Sabbath, the theme of Revelation is still about how will God's people find rest. That's what the entire point of Revelation is to show us the way. And the way in Revelation kind of winds around a bit, right? And the way is meandering when we got trumpets and seals and churches and all these things. But the ultimate goal of Revelation is, how do we get from where I am right now, where life is tough, where sin is in this world? Yeah, Jesus died for me and rose for me, but He left. How do I get to a place where all of His promises come true, where I finally enter into His rest in the fullest sense of that phrase, when I fully realize His promises in my life that He has made to me from the beginning? In Revelation, it's I'll show you the way. It takes you by the hand through all the weirdness, but it brings you to the end where it's this is where you find rest. And it really stands to reason that this has been, for us, humanly speaking, the story of the Bible. How do we get from where we started to where God has promised us? And it's a story about rest. Because I think sometimes when you sit down, you're busy throughout the day, you finally find your chair, and you sit down, you don't realize how tired you were until you sit down, and then there's no getting back up again. I have a feeling that when we get to this new heavens, new earth, and we finally get to rest, we enjoy some Sabbath rest now, but it's imperfect because we still live in this world and we're still wrestling with sin and all that kind of stuff. When we get to this new heavens, new earth, and we finally get the rest, I don't think we're going to realize how soul tired we had been our entire lives until we get to that point. We are so beat up. We carry so many scars, so many disappointments, so many frustrations, so much just anger because of how powerless we are to affect life the way that we think it should go. And we want to see family believe, and we want to be better Christians than what we are. And we want to see, it breaks our hearts when we see, the world being destroyed and people being goofballs in a bad way. I think all of that stuff just wears on us. But we can't stop down here. We have to keep moving. We have to keep working. We have to keep being with our family. Like, we don't have time to stop and just nurse all that. I think if our, our body displays its wounds, fairly obviously, but I think our spirit does not. And I think when we get to this place of peace that God has finally promised us, you'll be like sitting down in that chair after a long day, and you feel like, oh my goodness, I am tired. That life was exhausting. And I don't want to get into the whole millennium and all that stuff now, but I think that's what that time is for us to kind of rehabilitate and heal and work through a lot of the damage that's been done to us throughout our lives here. But I think this is what Sabbath points to. Every week here, this is what Sabbath points to. It points to this new heavens and this new earth where we finally and fully understand the complete weight and therapeutic meaning of the word rest that God is offering us. Not just rest from activity, but rest from this soul-crushing, just heavy existence of having to fight this battle every day against myself and to be interceding for others and dealing with the stuff that happens to us. This is what the Sabbath is pointing us to. So, and this is the trajectory of the Sabbath in the Bible. If human history would have ended on the last page of Revelation when it was written, Jesus would have come and all that, I think we would be surprised to find out that human history could have gone the way that it went to, because in the New Testament, Sabbath is going up. Sabbath is becoming more prominent because you read Revelation and you're like, yeah, this rest that God has promised us, that the Sabbath is a part of, this is where all human beings are headed. This is great. Sabbath is great. It's pointing us towards a new heavens and a new earth. And then suddenly you put down Revelation and you go through the next few decades and you're like, where did Sunday come from? How did this happen in Christian history? It's a scandal. It's shocking. No, I don't care. I mean, we should be worshiping God every day, so please don't misunderstand me. But Sabbath has a meaning in the Scriptures that no other day has. And it is not our ability as human beings to decide on what the meaning of the other days are. Sure, Jesus rose on Sunday. Sure, he died on Friday. Sure, he ate a Last Supper on Thursday, and then he did other things in his last week on the other days. Absolutely. Those are all special things. Every day is special if you're using it to commemorate something Jesus did on it. Right? Why does Friday not have the same weight that Sunday did? Is the cross not equal to the resurrection? It's not our job to give added meaning to these days. It's our day to recognize the meaning that God has given them. And there's no text, there's no verse in all of the Scriptures, there's no day that has as much meaning as the Sabbath. And I think when we see the whole scope of the Bible as we've done over these last 12 presentations, we see why. Because it was always pointing us towards our Creator, towards God as our Creator, towards God as our Redeemer, and to the promise that God has for us, the rest that He's going to give to us in a new heavens and a new earth. And if we would have kept that in mind, I can't help but think, I know we're imperfect creatures, but if we would have kept that in mind throughout the centuries, how differently our own faith might be. How different the legacy. We might have had a tradition of Sabbath keeping. Why not for 20 centuries rather than something else? So guys, the Sabbath was meant to be enjoyed forever. It was never meant to go away. And by keeping the Sabbath today, you can get your Christianity at least back on track with the way that I think it was always meant to be practiced. Doesn't mean we do everything perfectly. We're all still learning and growing in terms of the practice of our faith. But this one's a big one. This one's a big one. So if you're watching or you're here and you're not fully on board with the Sabbath keeping yet, I invite you to, as we've been saying the whole time, give it a try. Give it a try. See what happens. I don't think God's going to fail to bless you. And if there's a blessing at stake, go for it. Reach for it. Grab it. Well, life's not going to be worse. Not if God has promised something to you. It's only going to be better. So reach out and grab it. Talk to some old Sabbath keepers here. Chances are, you might even inspire them, because sometimes the decades drift on and we kind of get into a routine and we just kind of do the things we do without thinking about what it means and what it's for. You might even inspire some old Sabbath keepers by jumping in on this thing. All right, some of us get a little crusty. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands. You already raised your hands that you fell asleep during the sermon, so we're not going to go any further than that. I've seen enough today. Let me pray with you, though, before we go. Father above, I just want to thank you for the gift of the Sabbath. It's historically unaccountable for what happened to your day. We can kind of understand it from human perspective, Lord, but we can't help but also think that there was another purpose behind removing the Sabbath. That even though you told us to remember the Sabbath day in Exodus 20, verse 8, and even though in Revelation 14, verse 7, you quoted the Sabbath as a final message to be going out to the world, even though you're bidding us constantly to remember the Sabbath in the Bible, it was one of the first things we forgot. And Lord, just because we belong to the wider Christian world, just apologize for that. Can't change it now, but that's part of our Christian story, and it's to our shame, I believe, that we so easily abandoned it. That this day that you had given us is a gift, and it is a gift. I think anybody who has been keeping Sabbath for any length of time can testify what a blessing it's been in their lives. And right now, Lord, we're reading the news, we're looking around what's going on. We need as many blessings as we can get. We need more joy, not less. We need more contentment, more peace, more serenity, not less of those things. We need more rest, not less. And so it seems that the Sabbath is still as relevant today as it always has been. So Lord, if there's somebody who's on the fence about keeping Sabbath, I just ask that you would, in a lovely, Jesus-y Christian way, just push them off the fence. They'll land better. They'll get back up again. Just thank you for the gift of this day. We're going to go out, Lord, and eat some food together, spend some time together. And we're just grateful for you and you giving us this moment to pause, turn off the headlines, and just enjoy your presence. We give you everything we've got. In Jesus' name, amen.